Know the story of how he was killed. And he was with two other guys, or three other guys, and myself when we did the first reconnaissance up Cirrus Gully a couple of years before. And he wanted to be involved in the first ascent, but wasn't. And so he wanted to be the first that did a solo on Cirrus Gully, Polar Circus. And at the time, he and I would argue a lot. We were together on Nuptse. And back here in Canada, we'd argue about things. He was much more far-sighted. He could see the way climbing would evolve in the future. I was much more rigid and conservative. And when we would pass under Rundle, he would point to those smears up there, Terminator replicants, Sea of Vapors, even though they had no names at that time, and would say he's gonna climb one of those. And I would tell him that's crazy. No one's gonna do that. That's ridiculous. And then I was guiding Aconcagua in 1982 and he was killed. And for some reason I felt terrible about his death. I felt that somehow I contributed to it because I was jealous of his ability. And I felt horrible. And it was the only time in my life I set out to get drunk and look for trouble. And I went out on my own. A friend of mine, Boyd Calloway, who we took to Aconcagua, he was only 16 at the time, came with me. I think he could see that I was up to no good, and I got drunk, and then I was caught pissing on a statue in a square in Mendoza, and a couple of guys with submachine guns came up to us, and I was just feeling horrible because I felt that my envy of John had led to his demise, and that would stay with me for many years to come. We'd set off for Everest, and this was the first view I had of Everest. This is a telephoto lens of Everest from about 40 kilometers away, just peeking out over the top of the ridge of Nuptse. And so the first time I saw it, it wasn't very significant. It didn't really stand out much. And I asked, "Where's Everest?" And a Sherpa explained to me, pointed, and then said, "Chomolungma." And I said, "What?" He said, "Chomolungma, Mother Goddess." And that was the first time I saw the mountain and heard that term. And from that point forward, that would be how I would think of this mountain. Not as Mount Everest, named after the British cartographer who calculated it was the highest in the world, but as Mother Goddess, and Mother Goddess of the earth. And I noticed how the Sherpas showed such tremendous reverence for this mountain. How when they'd have tea, they'd pour a bit on the ground for her. When they'd eat rice, they'd put a bit on the ground for her. They'd do ceremonies in base camp. And that's how my attitude developed about what this mountain was about. I would find as the years go by that she has been very kind to me. And it'll become be apparent pretty quickly here that I didn't get up it because I was the best climber, not at all. I was lucky on Everest, and that's how the things would unfold. So normally, where's that clicker? Okay, so what am I pressing here? Upper left, is that right, Andrew? Or upper?
Yeah, upper left.
Upper left, so let's try this. Oh my God, it works. Okay, so just quickly, a couple of slides as people who aren't initiates like all of you, like what do you need for climbing Everest? So I explain to people you should have some basic alpine skills, and alpine skills mean you know how to climb rock, and you know how to climb ice, and you know how to climb on snow. So my initial exposure to rock climbing where I started to develop any skills was on the Okotoks boulder. We'd go out there and boulder till our hands were so numb you couldn't even hold a cigarette up to your mouth. And I loved it on Okotoks because I'd stay until the sun would set. And I loved sitting on top of the boulder watching the sunset below the Rockies. And then those skill sets I learned on the boulder would apply to harder and harder climbs as we got better. Some of you would recognize the image on the right, that's South Hauser Tower in the Bugaboos. It's a friend of mine, an outward bound instructor from Colorado. I'm climbing with Larry Derby. I'm proud of that climb because I did the whole thing from bottom to top in a pair of Galibier Super Guides. I couldn't find rock shoes that fit me, so I did it in my regular mountaineering boots, and it was one of the best climbs I've ever done. It was so enjoyable. I hope I'm pressing the right thing here. I borrowed this photograph from someone, I can't even remember from who. I met Sharon Wood down in, by the way, Sharon's just sitting up front here in case those of you don't recognize who's at this prestigious table. Yeah, let's hear it for Sharon. I met Sharon down in Yosemite, and then I wasn't doing routes as hard as this, but climbed down there for a couple of weeks, and then we go back to Canada and come back again another time. I enjoyed Yosemite, and I use this image to show there's extremes you can take the sport of rock climbing to. And then we had to show, or I have to show a little bit about, well, what's involved in ice climbing. So I show a picture of Tactical Falls in the summer, and then show what it looks like in winter, and explain a bit about good old Chouinard crampons, what we use to climb ice. Crampon, the metal framework of steel you strap to your boots, explain the dynamics behind how they work. Big difference between how Sharon and I climb, by the way. Sharon does it on pure talent and ability. I do it by maximizing what I can get out of my tools. I like making sure my hand tools are razor sharp, thin down the blades, my crampons are always sharp. I climb with a small file so I can keep the edge there. And then I look at Sharon's tools, which are dull, they're bouncing off the ice. Her crampons bouncing off. I don't know how she gets up stuff, except for the fact it's probably just good talent and good ability, which I don't particularly have, but I know how to work with steel. And I love that. And when these initial Chouinard or Black Diamond cramp ice screws came out, and then the Snard, I think that's a Snard, right? It's so old I've even forgotten about them, from low alpine systems, those became the de facto really good tools for climbing steeper ice. One you could put in quickly and you could actually get it out, and the other ones, when you screwed them in, were really solid. And that became standard practice. Now, there may be one or two people here who knows what's on the right-hand side of the screen. Anyone identify it? And that's a big bird from low alpine systems. You don't see them much around. They're a beautiful tool. It's got a circular edge. And with that tool, whose pick didn't break, I was able to get some of the better climbs. Helmet Falls, White Man's Falls. That was an excellent tool. I still have the thing. I was thinking of bringing it tonight, but I didn't want to get arrested, so I didn't. I forget where the hell this is. This is probably just on Cascade Waterfall or something like that. Just showing the standard way we belay and all the rest of it for uninitiates. And of course, what's this called again, Sharon? You did that? Sorcerer? Yeah, Sorcerer. That's right. Sharon and I went in there. She told me it's a good time to go in. When Sharon calls me up and says we should do this, usually I listen to her. And so we went in there, and that had played an important part on two sides of my life. One, it was so nice to do something quickly. I mean, when we did Cirrus Gully, we were up there for 5 days and nights. Sharon, I think we did it in 7.5 hours when we did Cirrus Gully. And then when we did this, I think we did it in 2.5 or 3 hours. And then it was also the time she told me, you've got to get rid of those lime green stretch pants. I had a pair that I'd gotten long before, and she convinced me that neon lime green was no-no anymore. So I had to get a proper suit. At that point, that's when I started buying better clothing. And now, it was with 12 years of experience of alpine climbing, rock climbing, ice climbing, and high altitude climbing that I went to Everest with in 1982. When my daughter saw this image, she said, Dad, you got to get rid of that picture. Nobody wears shorts like that anymore. Yeah, I still wear shorts like that. I don't like long, baggy shorts. And Jim Elzinga was the equipment manager for the 82 expedition, and my job was to assist him in doing that. So I went over there with Jim and Dwayne Congdon in the early months of 1982 to get the majority of our 27 tons of equipment into Kathmandu, and then a good portion of that into base camp, and set up what were we using? We were using microwave, and we were using shortwave radios and satellite to try to transmit a live image from the summit of the mountain. We didn't do it, but that was the plan. And then we got the gear into base camp, which involved 260 kilometers overland on foot, and then came back to Canada. And then in July of 1982, the main team left to go there. I stayed in Canada for an additional 8 or 9 days because we had 20 bags of equipment that still had to be brought over that hadn't arrived in Calgary yet. So because I'd been in a number of times earlier, for NUPSE and for the initial getting the gear in, I volunteered to stay behind. When the equipment arrived, I flew alone with all that gear to Kathmandu, dumped it off with the main group there. Our group was already walking in, and I got one Sherpa with me, and then I tried to catch up to the main group. So they were about, at this stage, 7 to 8 days ahead of us. So the walk into Everest is across the grain of the land. The drainage of water goes north and south. So for the first 2/3 or half, you're going across the grain land, up and over high ridges, down into deep valleys again and again, and then you scoot straight up north to arrive at base camp. 260 kilometers. It's beautiful terrain, thick lush green jungles, plains, rice paddies, rivers, and it was lovely. It wasn't really crowded. There wasn't a lot of other people there. I was really pleased. I really enjoyed the walk in. We did double mileage each day because we didn't have a lot of people. It was one Sherpa and myself, so we'd hike for 11 hours a day, 11 to 12 hours a day, and it was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. And eventually we would catch up to the main group. I think about 7 days later we caught up to them. It was pouring rain most of the time because we were going in during the monsoon season. What does that mean? Yeah, well, other than being soaking wet, it usually means blood-sucking leeches, which are everywhere. And these images, and I'm sure you've seen lots of pictures of them, they look so benign when they're that tiny, but when they've been on your body for anywhere from 4 to 6 or 7 hours, they get as big as your thumb and twice as long. So on this trip, I was the luckiest member because I still smoked. And as a child, don't forget I was working for Crown Surplus next year, I was raised on war films. So all my childhood heroes were people like Errol Flynn in Objective Burma, Humphrey Bogart in African Queen, Jeff Chandler in Maryland's Marauders. And so they would be contending with blood-sucking leeches and deal with them by burning the suckers off with a lit cigarette. And that's what I did. You could use iodine, you could use salt, but to make them suffer because they took your blood, I would like to light a cigarette up and burn them off my body because you pick them up all over the place. And it's a third world country, meaning, you know, it was the poorest country in the world at the time, not a lot of facilities. If you had to go to the bathroom, you just, you know, took your pack off, climbed into the jungle, did what you had to do, get back on the trail, get moving again. And, you know, these things, they don't have any pride, they don't care where they attach themselves to. And because I was the only member who smoked, a lot of the Canadians would pick these things up, and they'd ask me, because I was one of the team, to help burn them off them. And it happened so often that by the time we finally got into base camp, 21 days later, not only had I run out of cigarettes, but I'd gotten to know some of the members far more personally than I'd ever intended when I started the expedition. When we got closer to Everest, we went through numerous monasteries, and here is one at Tangboche where we got blessed by the head lama, and they give us a handful of blessed rice, a good luck scarf, and a mantra to say. And none of us believed in any of that stuff, I don't think, but all of us kept the good luck scarves and the blessed rice and used them as the days would unfold. Himalayan yaks to get our gear, along with Sherpas, porters, and ourselves to carry the stuff into base camp, and then finally arrival at base camp, which is so different.